Hi and welcome to Thete Gaming and another video on the Ret Paladins. I'm just going to do a series of these like diaries to discuss either it could be a new change, and there has been a new change in the latest build today, or it could just be something I haven't discussed before, or something that interacts with something that is new for the alpha. So first thing, there's been quite a pleasant change. I complained last week about cleanse toxins. It was where was it? It was down here somewhere. Was it down there? I can't remember exactly, but it was no, it was down here. And I did sort of suggest I wouldn't mind seeing it swapped with the crowd control one. I know some people like the crowd control as well for dungeons. Cleanse toxins is an incredibly useful utility in dungeons. In a raid it can still be useful, but in a dungeon you can easily find yourself with a healer that cannot do either poisons or diseases. So in you come. It's brilliant. So they've now moved it. They've actually swapped it with the armor and crit increase. I'm fine with that. The basic stat increase is one. Sure, you know, 2 talent points for +4 crit would be fine. But yeah, I can absolutely live without it. Very happy with this change now. There are still some other issues. So what I'm going to discuss in this video is really where Ret are going to be from a competitive point of view. Obviously I've not played Shadowlands. As far as I can see, we're not going to be in a worse position than that. So if you've been raiding Ret, you've probably raid Ret with the same level of difficulty or ease. But I am going to cover, when we're sort of looking at this critically, rather than trying to jump on the oh my god Ret is screwed or no it's fine platforms, there are 4 things to my mind that you need to be mindful of in order to, particularly for mythic raiding, in order to secure a position for yourself. All of the things being equal, so player skill and so on. In terms of the spec, the first thing to bear in mind is the melee DPS class. We have what you might call the melee DPS tax, which I'll go over. The second thing you need to be mindful of is survival. The third thing you need to be mindful of is doing mechanics. And the fourth thing you need to be mindful of is what do you bring to the raid to allow other people to do their jobs better. So the first one, the melee tax. Obviously, raid fights have to be designed to prevent the whole raid just grouping up in one place, because that would make it far too easy for the healers and for people with other defensives to just keep the raid alive while you just brain dead tunnel the boss or ads or whatever. It just removes a hell of a lot of skill from the game if you can just group everyone up at all times. So the way Blizzard prevent you doing this is with ground effects that will prevent you wanting to all be in the same place. It could be just ground effects that spawn under players. It could be ground effects that appear randomly. It could be splash effects. But whatever it is, it's there to dissuade you from grouping up. This is a problem for melee DPS straight away, who have to be put in wherever they're DPS in an ad or the boss or whatever. There's limited scope for moving. So that also limits the number of melee DPS you would ideally want to take in most fights. There are some fights where actually it's a benefit by virtue of the fact that those disadvantages largely go away. But by and large, that means you want to limit the number of melee DPS. So straight away, that puts pressure on the raid spot. The second one is survivability. Now, if I were to say something like, the Retribution Paladin is not looking very survivable, people go, are you having a laugh? You have literal immunities. What is wrong with you? But that is the problem. They're immunities, long cooldowns, they're for emergency uses, right? In a fight, if you've got regular damage bursts, what you really want is a damage reduction, not an immunity, a damage reduction on a shortish cooldown. There's a lot of people at the moment looking with some envy towards the shamans at the moment with their 40% damage reduction on a 2-minute cooldown. But a lot of people are wondering, can we not just have divine protection back, which would be 20% damage reduction, I'll say 1-minute cooldown. There's definitely scope for it. Here we've got eye for an eye. That works against physical damage only. Not very useful in a raid. In most situations it's quite niche when you would get to use this in a raid. But just because vengeance, it's just useless. Like for leveling, sometimes there's some I take it when leveling sometimes, because you know you can use it to, you can stun mobs when you're leveling. You can use it to heal yourself as well as carry on doing some damage. Beyond in group work and it's not useful. You're not going to take it in a raid. You're not going to take it in a dungeon. It's a wasted space. So why not put Divine Protection there and have Divine Protection only work against magical damage? That way, it's still not as good as like overall damage reduction. People may still look misty-eyed at the Shaman, but nonetheless, you get a choice. You know, and that's absolutely fine. Most of the damage you take in a raid is magical damage anyway. Divine Protection, 20% reduction every minute. Job's a good one. Now, it's not totally impossible to deal with these things because we do now have access to Blessing of Spell Warding. It would mean reducing talents elsewhere. Obviously here, this is just level 60. I'd get an extra 5 at level 70, but there's damage. There's useful ones to spend it on there as well. So Blessing of Spell Warding would not be one you'd want to routinely take, but in theory you could. If you imagined there was a situation where there were some significant spell effects happening, if you were lucky every 2.5 minutes you'd be okay. You could use Divine Protection Divine Shield on one of them. Well, Divine Protection. Divine Shield on one of them. Then you could use Blessing of Spell Warding on the other, and you could alternate like that. In reality, they're likely to be more frequent than every 2.5 minutes. But it could help you with a couple of them here and there. And then you ask yourself, so why is it important to have this damage reduction? It's really because the more damage you take, it's not just that you put yourself at greater risk of actually just dying. You know, you have a smaller margin to play with. And if you can't afford to sail a little bit close to the wind as a DPS, you are not going to do as much damage. So damage reductions are really useful from that point of view. But also, even where you're not actually dying, just taking more damage means the healers need to work harder. A raid group only takes as many healers as it needs. You know, 4 is fairly standard in a mythic raid, but 3 is preferable. If you can knock it down to 3 by having a load of DPS who can manage their own damage intake, that's preferable. It helps you get a whole new DPS class, right? So, or DPS player. So that's the importance there, and it's not looking that great from that point of view. So then the third thing is dealing with mechanics. So various tools that we'd ideally like to deal with mechanics. First of all, some of those mechanics involve moving away from our DPS target, usually the boss, to a place either to blow up somewhere, or maybe we're like a bomb, or maybe to drop some stuff on the ground, or maybe just we have to get out of the way because a fatal effect is happening around the boss. Now, what you want to do as soon as that is achieved, first of all, you want to move away at the last possible second, and secondly, you want to get back as soon as possible. That means movement speed increases. Now, we have movement speed increases. I was remembering back in the days, I was watching some of my old TBC videos and thinking we had nothing to do this. Now we've got Divine Steed. I am still aggrieved at the fact that we have to spend 4 talent points to get a 5-second Divine Steed, which is 100% movement boost, and a second charge, because it's a 45-second cooldown now. How's that improved? That may have improved, actually. Maybe they've made that change as well. I've not spotted that. Okay, well, that's much better. It is still 4 talent points, though. And again, there is pressure for them. There is pressure for them. There are things we'd still like to take. But that allows you to get out quickly, allows you to get back quickly, arguably, as well. There is Long Arm of the Law. It's only like 20% boost for 2 seconds. But, you know, it was always useful. It was always useful in the day in Moth when it was introduced, I remember. Judgment was on a shorter cooldown, as I recall, there as well. But it allows you to judge on your way out to give yourself a little boost. But at 20%, I think it needs to be more. I think 40%, you know, especially if it's only for 2 seconds. 2 seconds is fine. I just think more than 20%, sorry. What you want to do as I say, is that the quicker you can move out, the longer you can stay in before you have to move out, more damage. And remember, a Retribution Paladin, and it's not the only class that's like this, but the Retribution Paladin, every second you're not doing damage, you're losing damage. It's not one where you're spending a resource and then it naturally builds back. We're building our own resource in Holy Power and then spending it. So, and it's very rapid fire. There's almost no downtime. Even on this character, this is a basic character, you know, with just the starting stats, some starting gear. This is obviously this gear is going to massively improve in Dragonflight, and your stats are going to improve. And yet, I've been, you know, hitting the training dummy. There's very little downtime, almost none. The odd second here or there, and even that will go away with, you know, if you wanted more haste. So, or if you naturally acquire more haste and don't want to reforge it away. So, yeah, it's really important to stay in as long as possible. And when you can move back, when it's safe to move back for whatever reason, you want to get back in as quickly as possible. Now, on this point of view, it's not absolutely terrible. There are melee DPS classes who have better. And again, it is a competitive thing. It's not about whether it's deemed good enough in isolation. It's whether is it better than some other alternatives. So, but on that one, I would say I'm fairly neutral. There are ones who have better movement abilities. There are ones where it's not so good. In terms of other general mechanics types abilities, some of them require soaking. That again is where you'd want your damage reduction. You know, and it is where we do have things. As I say, you have the access to you know, bubble or spell warding potentially for a fight where it'd be useful, but it's that's assuming that it will allow you to soak it if you're actually immune. Sometimes you can have a situation where, you know, damage reduction great, but if you're actually immune, it's like you're not soaking it at all. And the other thing is again, it depends how frequently you have to do it. Sometimes it's on a random thing where you like just get picked every few minutes. Sometimes you're getting like picked 3 times a minute or something. So a damage reduction there would be really useful as well. Then the final thing is, what use are you to the raid? In other words, do you enhance others? I mean, there's I haven't checked. Was the new warrior stuff out? There was talk of the skull banner coming back for warriors, so that's an example of where warriors bring a thing. Shamers, of course, we know bring like, you know, heroism, and so lots of DPS classes bring a thing that helps buff other players in their raid to make them do more damage or take less damage. It can be defensive benefits. This is where we fall down badly, because everything we bring that could be covered by that is single use. So we can make someone immune to physical damage with Bop. Again, we have to talent for it. We could use Blessing of Sacrifice on someone if we take that to help them reduce the amount of damage they take. It's one person. You know, Blessing of Spell Warding is not a self buff. We could use that on a person to let them be immune to magical damage. It's one person. So there will be some fights. There'll be a few fights. Same with Blessing of Freedom when it comes to it, or Lay on Hands. And Cleanse Toxins, although at least you can, you know, it's 8-second cooldown on this one. But, you know, it gives you a little bit more use. But it's a situation where there will be a few fights per expansion. There's always a few fights per expansion. It's like, right, we could really use with that. But a few fights per expansion doesn't get you in the raid, generally speaking, does it? It gets you maybe in farm fights. You can build up your gear so that you can then be available for that one fight where it's useful. Or your alternative is like playing Holy and Ret, so that you're healing on most of the fights, and then you just DPS on the fights where Ret is useful. That's probably a way forward. What we don't have is any abilities at all that just work on the raid or a group of people, even like sticking something down that's useful to the melee DPS. We don't have anything that either buffs or protects a group of players. And in that, we're quite unusual. It's quite bizarre to describe a Retribution Paladin or any Paladin as having low utility. But that is the reality of it, because although we have a lot of buttons that we can potentially have available to us, they are all single use and in many cases of very niche use as well. So that, I think, is the main problem. It might even be worth, you know, making a bit of a deal of this on the forums and trying to explain this, because the fact that they've moved cleanse toxins shows that they are actually responding a little bit. But that would be my big issue. It's like there are several melee DPS classes. If you bring them, you get the damage. I mean, Retribution Paladins aren't going to do more damage than these other classes. It'll be the same damage, if we're lucky. But it's like, well, you could take a Retribution Paladin, you get the damage, you get them to hit something with a hammer. Or you could bring these other classes. You could bring this class and you get a damage boost every now and then. Or you could bring this class, you get a defensive boost every now and then. And some people may at this point say, well, there's devotion aura, you know. But the problem with this is, first of all, it's just a flat 3% damage reduction all the time. Where you want your damage reduction is when your burst damage is coming, when the raid fight just goes mental. It's like, right, loads of magic damage coming in for 10 seconds. The problem with a flat effect like this, and it works all the time, is it's not very useful when you most need it, because it's just working all the time. The other thing is, you're not going to take it. You really don't want to take it, because the Retribution aura is actually quite good. It's not yet implemented. I mean, it's still got the thing where someone dies and you get Avenging Wrath. Thanks very much. But they're not yet implemented. When a party or raid member within 40 yards takes more than 50% of their health, you gain Seraphim for 6 seconds. Now, it's not clear exactly what that means. That's a bit ambiguous until it's implemented. We'll have to work out exactly what it means. But it can't occur more than every 30 seconds. But it can still mean that if there's a fight where people are taking damage, there's every half a minute, there's a good chance of you getting 6 seconds worth of Seraphim for free. That sounds like a pretty good aura to me. I don't want to lose that aura, do you? Of course not. To take this, and again, this is probably going to be brought by the Holy Paladin anyway, unless they give Holy Paladins their own aura, although we don't actually know yet, because they haven't implemented Holy Paladins yet, or at least not the new talents. So it is looking a bit grim from that point of view. I mean, I would say it's not a doom and gloom in that you'll not be able to raid. If you've already been raiding as ready, there's no reason that I can see that you wouldn't otherwise. But yeah, if you the way I sort of look at it and the way I describe it is, if you're going to be raiding as a Retribution Paladin, and for getting into mythic dungeons, arguably it's even worse. Although, as I say, the cleanse toxins I think it's quite useful. If you're looking to get into a mythic raid, I mean, you're either going to be a significantly better player than average in that guild, therefore you're dragging more effectiveness out of your spec than, say, someone else with what might be a better spec on paper, or your raid guild is struggling to recruit some of the more desirable classes, so they're sort of taking you along as well. You are better than an empty space, which is true. We are a lot better than an empty space. Or you're the raid leader, is how I describe it. If you think about it on paper, designing a raid group for the general raid fights, for the typical progress fights, what do you bring a Retribution Paladin for? It's not anything we actually have at the moment, because all of it, the buffs, the debuffs, there's a lot of them that you can get access to. There are a lot of them if you just count them. But in most cases, they're of zero use in a raid fight, and where they are of use, it applies to a single person on a several minute cooldown. So unless it's going to be part of the strategy for a fight, and that'll happen a few times in expansion, for the general fights, we're not actually bringing anything at the moment. But those are my thoughts on that anyway. Let me know yours in the comments below, and until next time, I'll see you later.